Hello, myself Sunil Ramkishan here. Basically, we are discussing about the one of the topic that is city creation. In city creation, basically, we are discussing about the army group. So, one of the person told that this is that person basically who was chief minister in 2001, and this was that person basically, that same person basically. This person only basically is here. He is basically the defense minister. So, it's not uh, coincidence basically. It can't be possible basically. That means something basically is going to happen basically. That is 100% sure. That is 98% basically because I don't say 98%. So see basically the software companies basically are not giving the job to Sunil R Nair basically. See basically this all software company has become one basically. Reason is this group and this group basically become one basically, and that is Indian group and basically the American group basically, because America group basically is handling the entire software industry. They are basically joined with this group basically, and that is this group and this group basically. This two group basically has become one basically, and they basically has not giving job to Sunil Arna. Reason might be anything basically, because we can't say the reason basically what way, why basically the reason is basically. And in India basically who is the basically software company basically who is handling the India, that is this person basically who left basically in 2001 only basically, when World Trade Center basically was crashed. That means it was not coincidence basically. Lots of people says that basically it was not coincidence that Tata Group basically came from America. It was not coincidence basically. That was not coincidence basically. Few people say that basically he came back to India basically. That was not coincidence basically. He actually might have got some information basically about this plane crashed and plane missing from the Himalaya and Mount Everest plane crash data. This was the reason basically why few people basically came back from USA. Six plane basically was not crashed in the Himalaya mountain when basically the this person basically was the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh. So few people basically came back from USA to India basically, because they basically might have tracked basically that something basically is going to happen big basically in future basically, and that big basically they might have tracked basically. I don't know basically what they might have tracked. That basically they came back to USA. Sorry, not USA basically. They came back to India basically. That means something basically they might have saw the future basically. That future is this basically, because the future basically which they have created now basically, that basically clashed basically, that crashed basically, that future basically was crashed. That was what this was that basically. Which city will create, but here basically the America city was, New York City was attacked basically. So New York City was basically, here basically we can say that basically half of the city basically was ended basically. So that was not the plan of the future basically. That is, this was not the plan basically. In future basically this was not the plan basically. So that's why basically they came back, because they were businessmen, and the businessmen basically know that basically that something basically has wrongly happened, because their daily routine task basically was changed according to the plan basically the USA basically was doing basically. So according to that basically the USA plan basically, the plan change of the USA basically, that's why basically few people basically immediately basically they came back to India basically, but not on in 2001 basically. they came after few years basically. Why? Because something basically, because there are lots of 22 crore Indian also basically staying there basically. That also they have to think. That's why basically they basically not came immediately basically, but they came after a few years basically, by shifting their groups to India basically. That means in 2001 and 2003 4 basically, lots of American Indian basically has came from the USA long before basically, before Corona only basically. That means in 2004 basically they only came basically, and 2005 also basically, and 6 also basically. So reason was this, the big reason basically, that is the vitamin C basically. Because vitamin C basically was, because they say that basically New York City basically this area has to develop. In that time, basically in September time basically of the November basically, New York City basically this area has to develop. But that basically was not happened basically. Instead of that basically what happened? The World Trade Center basically hit by the plane basically. Pentagon basically hit by the plane. That was not the creation basically, and that was not the plan basically. Their plan basically changed. And banks also basically, after that basically they have also basically done lots of plan basically. That also basically we are going to discuss basically, because lots of big bank directors basically who are basically handling everything basically from America, they basically came back to India. Basically how basically the plan changed, because according to this basically, which city has will create na basically, according to that basically lots of products are created basically. That also affected na basically, because that World Trade Center basically was not the plan basically. Due to that basically this also basically affected, and this connects to the bank's products basically. Banks products, see basically the conflict basically. See basically, if nothing basically, if one task basically is all, for example in project management, set of tasks basically are there, set of sprints basically we have divided, sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3. In sprint 1 basically this is the time period, sprint 2 this is the time period. If one of the task is also basically not happening in that time na basically, I am talking about the businessman group basically. Normal software company basically, there basically 1 or 2 day basically is fine basically, because they keeps the buffer time basically. So according to that basically the time basically gets differ basically. But here basically the businessman basically say that everything is basically going live basically, everything is live. So in that basically 1 or 2 day basically not will work, that is even 1 or 2 minute will not work basically. So that was basically the World Trade Center basically hit by the 2 plane, and for few plane basically more hit. That was the incidents basically which was happened basically, and that was basically the not the plan basically of the banks and of the groups also basically. So they basically immediately came back to India basically. So that was basically not coincidence basically, that was basically planned only basically. They basically came back to India. Lots of bankers also basically, that is the bank director also basically came back from India, from USA basically. That is, this was basically changed. If this was changed, that means basically some, because if any of the change will happen basically, then it's basically life and also is possible basically. Life and also is possible. Reason, the it might possible that the group basically might have changed. So if group basically might have changed basically, then the old group basically might be get in trouble na basically. That's why they immediately came back to US from India, from USA to India basically, because that type of possibilities are basically there. That's why basically, because bad business is also there and good business is also there. That's why basically. That's why. So in next video basically we are going to see a little bit more about this.